Competition is fierce these days. The solution, according to marketing experts, is to create a brand story for your company or your product. Sounds simple until you actually try to do it. And then, well, suddenly you feel like a stranger in a strange land, staring at a blank piece of paper or screen, or brainstorming with colleagues only to come up with something that by anyone's assessment is pretty generic. Not exactly what you were hoping for. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table. This show is now listened to in 138 countries, so a big shout out to all of our esteemed listeners. In each episode, we sit down with some of the smartest and most innovative people who join us as guests on this show and share a ton of valuable business and life-enhancing insights. Today we're talking with Deevo Tindall, a holistic branding strategist and founder of Fusion Creative, which he launched after 15 years of working in a corporate career. In this podcast, Deevo will be discussing what holistic branding is and how it can help differentiate your business, how companies can begin to create their own brand story, what companies are getting wrong about content creation, and how to stand out in a very noisy market. One of the foundations of successful marketing is having the right people in key positions. To achieve this, leading organizations turn to AsiaNet consultants. They have over 3 decades of boots-on-the-ground experience, giving them critical market knowledge and contacts. To learn more about AsiaNet consultants, check out their website at asianetconsultants.com. That's asianetconsultants.com. I'll leave a link for it in the show notes. If you've ever listened to a podcast and thought, I'd love to be a guest on one of these shows, well, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. There's a simple 6-step formula to landing guest spots. Follow this and you'll be able to start getting onto shows. To learn more, go to seat.fm/podcast course. That's seat, seat.fm/podcast course. I'll leave a link in the show notes for this episode, and of course, all of these links are going to be over on our podcast website at seat.fm. Meanwhile, let's get to working on our holistic brand with Deevo. Well, Deevo, I am delighted to have you with us here on A Seat at the Table. Branding is such a big topic these days. I think companies, have taken that a bit for granted, except for, of course, the big players who've always known the importance of branding. So I think it's really valuable to get this concept on the table, excuse me, to talk about it, to explore it from your point of view.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to. Let's dive in.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting is you talk about something that you refer to as holistic branding. What does that mean? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Before I do that, I want to sort of, if I may, offer some feedback on your opening statement, because there's a lot to unravel there.
Okay.
Branding itself, it's a very nebulous term. And I think that's part of the reason a lot of people, in terms of small businesses, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, don't necessarily embrace it because they don't exactly know what qualifies as branding. And branding's gotten a bad rap because, early on, people just thought it was creating a logo and having, some pretty colors and a nice website. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And it's sort of because of the term marketing. And I think people sort of think, okay, well, I'm doing marketing, but why would I need branding? Because they're one and the same. And I've literally had conversations with entrepreneurs that try to argue that they're the same thing, and they're completely not. And I think that's where people get kind of caught up and stumbling through it. But I'd just like to clarify, if I may, branding in of itself is literally everything about your company, your business, your brand. It's your messaging, it's your website, it's the way you answer your phone, it's how your logo looks, it's what your website says, it's your social media. It's literally everything along the customer journey that your customer, who is ultimately buying from you, is going to receive in terms of your messaging and what it is you want them to know about who you are, what you do, why you do it, and the value that you bring to the table. And then marketing is the way that you distribute that message and amplify that message and share that message. But before you can market, you have to brand first. And so I think people sort of don't understand that one becomes the other, and then they're directly integrated. I just wanted to clarify that, if I may.
Yes, I think that's an important point, and I think that you're right. We kick these terms about without really thinking about what they mean, and certainly not how they're applied, how they're executed on. So I'm very glad that you clarified that. Now, circling back to what you talk about, which is holistic branding, um, I think that's interesting, and I'd really like to learn more about that.
Yeah, so I don't know if I coined the term. I've never heard it before. I started using it a while ago because I was thinking about I got into yoga many years ago, and yoga takes this holistic approach in terms of, working from the inside out and working on your inner engineering because it ultimately manifests sort of your outer manifestation of who you are. And I started thinking about how does that term apply to a business and the approach that I have always taken to working with my clients. And really in a nutshell, without trying to get too wordsmithed on it, it's an integrative approach that really considers every aspect of a brand's presence and interaction through the customer journey, sort of like I was talking about at the beginning. And it's also inversely, it's everything you do as a business and how you engage in that process. So, like what I just talked about, it's a holistic approach in a sense for like an all-inclusive. It's everything you do as a brand. It's your messaging, all the things we talked about at the outro, and then in turn every point along the customer journey of the touch points and how they engage with your brand. So it's that sort of it's about creating this kind of seamless, consistent ecosystem across all of your channels, all of your touch points, from your visual identity to your messaging to your customer service to your digital engagement. And if I can I just tell a quick story? I just came back from Daytona, where I was working with NASCAR, and amazing company, honestly, just an absolutely amazing company. And if there's ever a model on how to build a business, I feel like NASCAR is one of them. But I was talking with the president during some photo shoots, and he was talking about sort of their hiring process and how they hire people who genuinely love NASCAR, and they hire people who are and the reason they do this is because they want you to be excited about the company you're working for. And so their branding, their brand message are the people. And if you ever speak to anyone from the NASCAR world, you'll literally see I've never interacted with anybody from that company that wasn't genuinely excited about what they're doing in their day-to-day job. And they are the brand. And so they hire people who will really represent the brand and talk about the brand and share the message in every interaction they have, whether they're at the office or offline. And so for me, holistic branding is like it's hiring the right people, it's having the right messages, it's et cetera, all the things I just talked about. Sorry, I get a little carried away with things.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think you're right. We do tend to overlook that. We tend to think of it more in terms of the things that are I suppose you might say more tangible, for lack of a better word, the logo, the name, maybe the tagline, maybe the some of the creative that we see around it. We forget some of the other, smaller things, but that do play a very big role in creating, like you say, that entire ecosystem that sort of envelopes whether it be the employee or the customer, but that, as you're saying, the people who were at the top of their game, this is what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just the people at the top of their game, because there's different ways to look at that, if I may. It it's really the people who understand their audience and
Mm,
truly understand their business. And they understand their audience because they've taken the time to understand themselves first and what they do, how they do it, why they do it. You hear the popular buzzword that everyone throws around for a few years, why? What's your why?
right.
But it's really critical. Like, what's your purpose of being in business? Why did you start this podcast, for example? Why did I start my business? Why did you choose to sell this type of service? And what is it that makes what you do unique? And then go about finding a way to craft that message so that you can share that with the right audience, so that ultimately you can connect with that audience and generate more revenue. Because the more you build trust, the more you connect with your buyer, the more you speak their language and solve their problems through your branding, the more inclined they are to connect with you, follow you, and sort of become a loyal, raving fan.
Yes, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as you're explaining it, you can sort of see how that works. You wouldn't think of it if someone hadn't actually sort of brought that to the table and started to explain it. But
Mhm.
when you do, you can really think about examples, in day-to-day life of companies that do that. Apple being obviously one that is, comes to mind and that I think everybody listening to this probably can relate to.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at every major brand spends millions of dollars. If you look at Coca-Cola or Apple or anybody who has massive bandwidth, you'll see across the board they're very consistent in what they say, how they
Mm,
say it, what they do, their visual assets, for example, very consistent because they want people to continually see this and then have a frame of reference for it. It's sort of like, how do I make our minds make mental connections when we see things, right? And so anybody who successfully brands is working on that mental connection with their audience so that when you see, hear, smell, taste, the first thing that pops to mind is, oh, I want to, that's Jane, that's Jane's product. I want to work with Jane, like that type of thing. And so, and you do that very, very consistently and very, very diligently in order to build that presence.
yes, absolutely. Now, one of the things that companies are being advised to do, right, is to create sort of their brand story, right? To,
Mm-hmm.
you know, create that unique ID, that story behind what they do. Now, that makes a lot of sense, but it's not easy to execute on. And definitely for companies that are making products that are more industrial or more generic, that are probably making a good product, a worthy product, but they don't lend themselves right to the same, easy to see creative. How do you go about determining that? I mean, what's a jumping off point for that kind of a business?
In terms of telling your story properly,
Well, even to find a story, right? That's an interesting story when you're making, let's say, auto parts, or you're making, some kind of intermediary that doesn't have the appeal of, for example, a smartphone or a computer.
well, let's use auto parts as in an illustrative example. So if you're selling auto parts, there's obviously people who need auto parts because there's lots of people who are do-it-yourselfers who like to fix their cars, whether it's for practical purposes because they don't want to take it to a mechanic or they just enjoy toying around in getting dirty and greasy and grimy. So if I was an auto parts store, first and foremost, I would really spend a lot of time trying to figure out who is my ideal buyer. Who are the types of people that would be buying from my auto parts store? And then I would be able to, and then I would want to understand sort of the psychometrics, if you will, the psychology around those types of people. What makes them buy what they buy? What products do they prefer? And what's the experience they want to have in purchasing that? And then once I sort of understand the how, the why, the what, and the who, it's really important to understand who because you're not selling to everybody. You're selling to a very, very specific audience. Once you're able to craft those sort of psychometrics, you're able to then build a story that supports each one of those. So maybe you're drawing off of the do it yourselfers who just love sitting in their garage on Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon with getting dirty and playing in the oil and fixing all the gadgets and the gizmos of their car and then drawing on that story. And so the point is to create visual and illustrative narratives that can emotionally create a bond between what you're doing, what your product is, what your service is with the people who would want to use it. And start crafting stories and narratives around that connects with that type of person. So, and that in itself, in a nutshell, is what branding does. And it's telling that story so that you can create that emotional connection. That's probably the centrifugal piece of that whole story that I just rattled off is how do you create an emotional bond with your buyer so that they're more compelled to become your fan and loyal to your product?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I hadn't really thought of it in that exact framework that you put forward. So, it's got sort of the wheels turning in my own head, thinking about that and thinking about different case studies. Um, it's sometimes easier when someone like yourself is explaining it. When you're actually tasked with doing it yourself, it can be really challenging for companies to try and do that. I mean, are there, do you have like a framework of questions or things that companies could start to use if they're sitting there listening to this and saying, we need to tackle this, but we don't even know where to begin?
Yeah, I think I do. And part of our process is we take every one of our clients through a very hyper engaging brand discovery process. And
Mm.
in that brand discovery process, we break down all of the things we've already talked about and we build a foundation so that they can build their brand message upon that. So whether that's your social media, whether that's your website, whether that's your business card, whether it's your logo, whether it's the tagline that you use, whatever the pieces that you are. Like, look at my handle is I call myself the CEO, but I'm the chief experience officer because what I really do for all of my clients is I create experiences for them, whether it's photography, whether it's video, whether it's branding. I take them through a journey from every step of the way. And so for you, whether you're selling auto parts or whether you are a business coach or whatever it is, the first element of that is really building your foundation and understanding, again, all of the core elements of what your business stands for. Who are you? Why do you do what you do? Where do you want this business to go? What is the problem you solve for your customers? What is it that you uniquely are presenting to the universe that nobody else can do or that you can uniquely qualifiably do better or uniquely or whatever it is. And once you have those foundational elements down, then you want to build upon each of those. So, for example, if you understand that your purpose is to sell do-it-yourself auto parts for a company, then we want to start crafting messages around connecting with that right type of audience, right? So you want to start building upon each of those areas, and then they all work symbiotically, holistically, right? That's the holistic branding. All of those pieces, they all work and interconnected, and so you want to develop each one of them and then be consistent about how you go about that. If you have a customer service team or you're answering your phone, you certainly need to have a proper voice message, for example. Like, it's just basic stuff. Your website should be absolutely critically sound. It should be very, very clear exactly what you do, why you do it. Spend some time and energy on search engine optimization so people can find it. Like, there's a bevy of things, but all of it starts with having a foundation of excellence to get going from that point forward.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, it's something that we overlook. We don't
Mm.
really think of it like that. And sometimes you end up sort of being in the middle of something, trying to fight your way to the outside, as opposed to, like you're saying, which is have a more systematized approach, having more, step by step and sort of a journey, as opposed to something that's is a little bit less organized, you might say.
Yeah, they're really let's unpack what you just said because there's a lot of kernels of wisdom in there. Having a strategy is really important. It's like going to the gym. Okay, I want to lose 20 pounds. So, I just sort of I meander in, I meander out, I do a
Mm,
couple of things here. I don't really have any purpose. I'm just kind of like doing stuff. And so you might get a few things stronger. You might, maybe you do curls every day in the gym and maybe you build up good biceps, but the rest of your body, you have to have a balance across everything. And so your business is the same way. You can't just devote a little bit of energy here, a little bit of energy
mm.
there, some things here. You have to have a structured and strategic and systematized approach to running your business and make sure that you're focusing on all the key points that are ultimately going to drive growth which ultimately lead to revenue.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think that, as you're saying, it's not something you think about until someone like yourself brings it up and makes you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you feel companies either misunderstand or perhaps underestimate about content creation? Are there key things that you think that perhaps companies are getting wrong?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and far be it from me, these are just my opinions. I've built a few businesses and I've made a lot of mistakes, and so I've learned a lot of things. But I think what I see most frequently is that people get the order wrong in terms of trying to build their business, and they do things without having a strategy. They do things without having a purpose. They do things without having a clear brand message. Just to use NASCAR's example, they hire people from the beginning of their process that are invested and vested in their brand. They don't want people, if you don't like NASCAR, you're not going to be able to work in that company successfully as you would if you enjoyed NASCAR because you won't be as excited about it. You won't be as passionate about it. So all of those things have a beginning, and all of those things have a foundation, and all of things have a strategy and a plan. So I think what I see a lot of times is that people don't exactly know where to start. They have this really great, juicy idea, but they're not really sure how to develop it. So what I see most is like people don't take the time to develop a process. They don't take the time to develop a plan. They don't take the time to have a strategy around all the different things that they want to do. And what happens is you sort of like get into the gym and you just kind of meander about. I do little things here, do little things there. I do some things really well, but I'm not focused on the holistic experience of my business. And so you sort of get lost. It's like no GPS coordinates. I'm just kind of getting in my car, driving aimlessly, found a few cool stop offs along the way, but ultimately it took me way longer to get where I ultimately wanted to go because I didn't really have a plan. I didn't really have a strategy. I didn't really have any way of sort of getting there.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that you're right. People don't know where to begin and don't know what they should be doing, but someone told them they should be doing something. So, like you say, they're grabbing at straws. They're doing this for a bit and that for a bit. How do you help people get out of that? I mean, I know that's not easy, but it's in a sense, it's a challenging environment because you're being pushed to do all these things, right? You feel obliged to do them. And yet, as you're pointing out, you're not really getting anywhere. You're just sort of like a hamster on a wheel, very busy, but not moving forward.
Yeah, how we help people specifically is a reset and meeting them where they are,
Okay.
and being very clear and foundational about what it is that they ultimately want this business to look like. And then
Right.
building a blueprint around that, a strategy around that, and getting very, very clear on what their brand message is and creating their business around that brand message. Because if you're not clear on the value that you add, Jane, if you're not certain about the type of audience, for example, that you want on your podcast, you're going to end up with all these different types of people that are showing up at your front door to be on your show, but there isn't really any real clear purpose for that. And because there's no real clear purpose, you don't have sort of a sustainable value for the audience that's listening in on you. They know that when they come to your show, they're going to get practical advice, practical tips. They're going to have guests that show up on your show and have engaging conversations with you and answer engaging questions that are well thought out because you've taken the time to sort of build that rapport, build that value, build that system that you have in place for your show. And so what we do is help people get clarity around what they want to do with their business and then help them build that in a scalable, strategic, and planned out approach so they can grow into their brand. And more importantly, letting everyone know that it's a process. Like this is a process. This does not happen overnight. Yes, there are rare exceptions where businesses made it overnight. You got people making millions on TikTok and YouTube. And if that's what you want to do, go do that. But if you want to build a sustainable business that is practically serving a purpose and enabling you to build a bigger revenue, that takes time. It does not happen overnight.
Wow, I'm so glad you brought that up because I have had that conversation again and again and again with companies who, like you say, you hear about these stories of people, like you say, who've become overnight successes on this or that social media, and people don't realize that that's more like a lottery win than it is the typical way things go. So people aren't willing to, even though they usually won't tell you that up front, but they don't like the idea of that it's going to be a grind for probably 18 months with not a lot to show for it. And you got to have the blind faith to continue to stay the course, right? And to work the plan, because if you can do it, you'll ultimately start to see some results. But very, very few companies really have the bandwidth for that. So I'm really glad that you pointed that out. It's important.
Yeah, and it's important. And there are people who there are a lot of people who have had overnight success using social media. I'm not arguing against that approach. And the path to success for those types of businesses is shorter than it was traditionally because we
Right.
have access to so much information, such a large, I mean, you have access to 8.5 billion people on the planet that you could ultimately sell your product to if you knew how to connect with them. And so these people who are making millions off of YouTube, or they themselves have a process though. They're not just
Right.
getting out there and throwing content out there. They're very meticulous about what they're doing, and they've figured out the algorithm and they've figured out the system. They understand how to operate it within that paradigm. But even they have a process. But the
Right.
crazy thing is what I would like to encourage most people to remember is that you hear about these success stories because they're sort of marvelous stories in of themselves, and people like to sort of pinpoint on those sorts of things. But what you don't hear about, for every millionaire, there's 1,000 people who didn't become a millionaire doing the exact same thing. And I would argue that the people who are making money, just to borrow the TikTok sensation or the YouTube sensation, even the people who are making the money and being successful in that space, they've invested in their own process. They're systematic, they're systematized, they have a purpose, they have a strategy, and it's all the others that did not have any success that do not have any of those elements.
Yes, that's very true. And you're right. I have actually spent a little bit of time learning about what people are doing who are succeeding, particularly on YouTube. And you're right. When you speak to the people, and I've had the fortune to speak to one or two people who have been huge successes on YouTube, and they tell you exactly what you're saying. It took them a long time to figure it out, and ultimately they figured out what worked for them, created sort of a system, and worked the system. So yeah, that's definitely the way it works. And like you pointed out, the reason you hear about these big wins is because they are so atypical. If everyone
Mm-hmm.
was able to do that easily, it wouldn't be getting a lot of conversation around it because it wouldn't be that interesting.
Yeah, well, everyone is able to do it. It's not easy. That's the key point right there. Everyone could do that, but it takes time, it takes energy, it takes resources, it takes commitment, it takes discipline, it takes all of the traditional tried and true, ideologies and philosophies that we've been taught. But again, at the core of it is there's a purpose behind what they're doing. There's a system behind what they're doing, and so they've ultimately been able to find that and unravel it for bigger success than the average person.
Yes, yeah. Now, how does a brand stand out in a very noisy, very competitive market? As you pointed out, the barriers have been completely removed now, and basically, yes, everyone is a potential customer in a sense, but everybody's then a potential competitor. Whereas before you had, a lot more of a moat around what you did.
How do they do that? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and every business is different. So I think first and foremost, understand your business, like we've talked about. I won't beat that horse any longer. But engage throughout your customer journey. It's really important to understand what that brand message is, and engage throughout that customer journey. Understand your purpose and your values up front. Have that brand message very clear and clarified, and build relationships with people. Serve first, sell second. Like in every situation, serve first, sell second. And in that process, you build meaningful relationships. And problem solving should be your mission. Like, how can you solve someone else's problem? What is it that you do? What is it that you sell? What is it about your product that can make someone who's going to exchange money for your services make their life easier? I think really another big piece for this for me is be very transparent in your value exchange so that people are very, very clearly communicated to what it is that you do and what I'm going to gain by giving you my time, giving you my energy, giving you my resources. And you do that by having a very strict understanding of what your values are as a business. What do you stand for? And everyone's different. Maybe monetary values is high on your list. For me, serving people and building relationships is top of my list. And so you just have to be very clear on what your values are and then be consistent across that in every way you engage. Consistency, and adaptability. Be very, very nimble because you might find that you had a modicum of success in one area. Let's just use social media as an example, but the algorithm changes on a daily basis. So if you find that you're getting stopgapped at certain elements, be nimble enough and self-aware enough to know that your business might not be flourishing the way that it was, and then be able to understand why it isn't. Look at your data, look at your number, query your customers, what was working, what isn't, and then be nimble and adaptive and make those changes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, it is a delicate balance, as you're pointing out, between having a system, working the system, staying the course, and at the same time understanding that we are in a very dynamic situation in terms of markets, in terms of media. So we also have to be able to be flexible and to understand when things have shifted, and we have to shift as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well said.
So I think that if you were to have sort of one, I don't know what you call word of wisdom for companies that are looking at branding and trying to figure out what they should be doing, what would you say is the first thing they should do to at least start to get themselves on the right track?
Focus on yourself first. Serve first, sell second. Figure out
Okay.
who you are. Figure out who you are. What do you do? What do you do better than everyone else? What do you do more uniquely than everyone else? What is that value exchange that you're going to offer people in exchange for your services and their money or their time or their energy, whatever it is? And be very, very, very clear on, and that's your brand message. Be very clear on your brand message. And I want to harken back to what we said at the outset of the call. Your brand message isn't just your logo or your website or what you said in your latest email or your crafty, witty response to a social media post. Your brand message is literally everything about your customer and your business. Think about it in a circular process with touch points all the way around, and that's a never-ending process. That circle, it's just always perpetually moving. And how can you inject in that circle all of the things that you do, why you do them, the experience you create for your customer, making sure that you're serving first, selling second, all the things we've talked about within that paradigm. How can you engage throughout that process? And that all starts with understanding who you are, what you do, why you do it, how you do it, and what problem are you going to be solving for your customer.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That really gives people a very clear idea of how they can start to at least embark on this process. Now,
Yeah.
Deevo, you've shared so many interesting things with us. I think that probably a lot of people who are listening to this would love to be able to connect with you, to be able to ask their own questions. How can people get in touch with you?
Thank you for that opportunity. You can find me online at fusioncreativebranding.com or Instagram or LinkedIn at fusionphotog are my handles on those two.
Okay, well, perfect. I'm going to include those links in the show notes to make it easier for people to connect with you. And I want to
Brilliant.
thank you so much for taking the time to join us here to share all of your experience and insights with us.
Thank you for the opportunity. I love being a guest. Thank you.